The Tom Woods Show, episode 531.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
When you're buying precious metals, it's essential to buy them from a reputable dealer. Otherwise, you could fall victim to one of many gold scams. Check out Schiff Gold's free report on avoiding gold scams at tomwoods.com/scams. Believe it or not, everybody, we're back with another post-debate analysis of a GOP presidential debate here in the 2016 season. And joining me, as always, is Lew Rockwell, founder and chairman of the Mises Institute, Mises.org. That's MISES.org. That's the website. And he is, of course, the publisher of LewRockwell.com, which we all read daily. And he was, early on, chief of staff for Ron Paul. I'm very glad to welcome him back to the show. Lew, thanks for being with me again.
Tom, it's a great pleasure, as always, to make fun of these guys.
Yeah, that's right. It sure is. Well, there is a lot to say about last night. At first, I thought, well, it's going to be just another one of these. But there were some entertaining confrontations. And I definitely thought, I think this is a case where the conventional wisdom is correct. I thought Rand did much better last night. I thought this was by far the strongest I've seen him.
Tom, I don't know who was coaching him, but he certainly is doing a far better job than the previous coaches. Rand seemed relaxed. He smiled. He wasn't yelling, and I thought he did very good. Also, of course, far more important, he was channeling his dad.
Yeah,
he was sounding like Ron. So this is. I had a friend recently make the point to me, a politically savvy friend, that Rand has got an indelible brand. As much as he would like to run away from it and has tried to run away from it, he's Ron Paul's son. Now, I happen to think that's a pretty great brand, but whether he thinks it's a great brand or whether he thinks it's an unfortunate brand, he's stuck with it. So his running away from his dad, both in issue terms and in personal terms, in refusing to discuss him and not involving him in the campaign, this has all had a very bad effect on the Ron Paulians. So will this, my guess is people are going to wonder, is this the real Rand? Is this, because this is the same guy who made great speeches in Ron's 2012 campaign, very outspoken, talked for one example about Dick Cheney being a war criminal and personally corrupt. Absolutely true, of course. So is it this guy last night, the guy in 2012, or is it the guy who right after he won the Senate nomination went and pledged his fealty to Bill Kristol, assuring him he was not like his dad on foreign policy, he'd always be loyal to Israel and similar things? Is it that guy, the guy who immediately hooked up with Mitch McConnell and has been joined at the hip with him ever since? Is it that guy, or is it this guy from last night? What are people going to think? I don't know. Are they going to send the money? Are they going to be the volunteers? Are they going to vote for him? Are they going to be devoted to him? I don't know. But this was, I thought, I have to congratulate him on doing a great job last night. However, I thought the whole thing was very sad because he could have been a contender. I don't mean he could have been elected president. That's a different subject. But he could have been an extraordinary senator. He could have helped build the Ron Paul movement into a Ron Paul-Rand Paul movement. He could have expanded libertarianism and brought new people in, carried the torch. Would have been a very different America maybe today if he'd done that.
Well, indeed. And, of course, this is why initially I was all in favor of seeing him in the U.S. Senate and so on and on. And it's not to say that he hasn't been the best U.S. senator. I have no doubt that he is the best U.S. senator. But you're right. And of course,
pretty low bar.
Yeah, it is a pretty low bar. And the thing is that there are so many other things that I don't even want to, I'm not even sure I should mention that really bolster what we're saying. We're not just nitpicking or looking for things to criticize or being libertarian purists. I mean, really. If that's your complaint, I got that complaint over and over again from our show last time, but not one specific was ever drawn out because no one wants to argue with us on the specifics. They want to pretend that we're just in our ivory tower and looking down on everybody. I mean, I think both from a libertarian perspective and from a strategic perspective and from a pragmatic perspective, it made sense for Rand to focus on the issues that his father championed. And I think things would have been quite different. So last night showed that he can do this if he wants to. Now, there's always room for improvement. So
Yes.
we'll get to, I mean, for instance, the confrontation with Rubio over military spending. All right, well, it's good that he points out that Rubio wants to spend too much on the military. I mean, because you don't hear that in a Republican debate, and that's very good. But I would definitely bolster that. I would have been ready with much more material than that, because a Republican audience will simply say, well, yeah, we are liberals on military spending because, as Cruz says, if we don't have a country, then we can't even worry about these other issues. So we have to start there, and then, as Cruz suggested, if I can just get rid of sugar subsidies, then I'll be able to fund the military, that sort of thing. I think he needed to say, I mean, there are a couple of ways you could have dealt with this. Trump mentioned Eisenhower, and you say, well, look, Trump is mentioning Eisenhower as a great conservative. Well, whether he was or he wasn't, he sure cut back on the military. There's no question about that. The military budget was cut in the 1950s, and nobody called Eisenhower a pinko commie. That was the height of the Cold War, for heaven's sake. I would have said that. And I also would have said there is no connection between the amount of military spending and how so-called safe we are and how stable the world is. The world was a lot more stable 12 years ago, before you people started running amok everywhere. You and Hillary Clinton. I would keep hammering away at that. You and Hillary Clinton going around toppling so-called dictators everywhere around the world has led to a much worse world. And you want to keep doing more and more and more of that? Maybe you belong to the wrong party. You sound like Woodrow Wilson. Like, I just hammer away at you people. Just all you want to do is tinker and remake the world and whatever. What the world is, and I would have to say this as a Republican, I'd say what the world is conservative about that. What you're doing is the exact opposite of conservative, and we've got a world that's in flames. We got refugees everywhere, and you want more money to do more of this? What are you, crazy? This audience isn't stupid, knowing in parentheses that maybe it is, but I would say that kind of thing.
Also, Rand is lucky that Rubio didn't say, you've made a proposal for a massive increase in military spending yourself, just not as big as mine. So the question is, do we really want to have a great military, or does we want a little semi-great military? And of course, the crowd cheered every call for massive expenditures on the military.
Right.
And the VA, which is, of course, they all love the VA. I must say Rand didn't address it, but they all talk about how terrible it is. The VA is such a mess. The VA is a single-payer system. How come nobody makes that point? It's socialized medicine, and of course it's a disaster. But of course, you have to love the VA just like you have to love the Pentagon, you have to love the CIA, all those other pieties of the Republican religion.
Let's see, what else have I got here? I do want to stay on Rand for a bit, because he did do well, and I want to acknowledge that. And I want to offer.
By the way, he had his hair. Something happened to his hair. His hair, for the first time, looked great last night. Just a very minor point, but
that's funny. I was doing dishes when I saw that, as you told me that Fox Business was streaming it, and in our living room / kitchen area, we deliberately don't have a TV, but I was able to put my laptop right there on the counter and do the dishes while I was watching, and I didn't notice that. But okay, let's see. Yeah, I would say again, he's got to talk about the consequences of this foreign policy. That all you people who are saying we need to have a no-fly zone here, we need to do this and that here, look at what the scorecard is. For everything you've done has turned into a disaster. You'd think you'd have a little bit of humility after a while. And then you might even appeal to Trump and say, look, Mr. Trump here, that not one of you will contradict, comes out and says, look, if the Russians want to take on ISIS, go ahead and let them. What's the matter with you? Or how come we have to be setting up no-fly zones or intervening in Ukraine? We have so many problems at home. Again, that's such a great populist message, even for Republicans. You can hammer away at that.
And, of course, Ron Paul used to do that. He used to talk about, we need to worry about the American people. We need to worry about America. If I can use a forbidden phrase, we need to put America first. And not be making trouble all around the world. Also, murdering people en masse, of course, is another point. So, Trump's interesting. Even though he beats his chest about the great military, strongest military in the world, and so forth, he's actually apparently not for using it. So that's it's an interesting compromise from a Republican standpoint. He gets them all cheering him about strengthening the military. We're the number one. We're the most powerful. But bring them, but don't do anything with them.
Well,
don't
I saw
intervene.
the other day that he was saying we got to hit ISIS hard. So maybe he does want to use it, but
Well, that's terrible.
but on Nixon to China grounds, he could get away with not using it because of his bluster and because he loves the vet. I mean, he so often talks about how much he loves the veterans that people don't realize this is obviously perfunctory and done for political reasons, but they still clap anyway.
Don't call them veterans; they're wounded warriors.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are talking about this on Veterans Day. Normally, I would do some kind of war thingy today, but, well, a Republican debate is pretty close, right?
And as Butler Schaefer likes to remind us, this used to be Armistice Day. That is a celebration of the end of World War I, which, of course, they turned into a celebration of present and future wars. Let's
see. Let's just do one more quick thing on Rand. He did mention the Fed in a negative light, and he mentioned how the Fed damages the standard of living. He said that we need to go back and look at the causes of the housing boom and bust. I wish he had spent less time on the standard of living and more time on the housing boom and bust and blame that on the Fed clearly. Because the standard of living thing, he's already being attacked today on Vox by some typical, frankly, idiot. Saying that no, low interest rates have been great for the poor because look, we have low and look, we have low inflation and so on, and it opens himself. Not that there aren't answers to that, but it opens himself up to that. Whereas, what are you going to say about look? How did it help the poor for there to be a housing boom and bust? Like, that didn't help anybody. But to see the Fed, at least being mentioned, that's good.
It was good, although I thought he slightly choked even at the idea of reforming the Fed. And in fact, I thought Cruz was a little more anti-Fed than Rand was.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, Cruz, again, focused on the sound money issue, which...
Also mentioned gold.
And this is... And people are saying, oh, that's just a crude political calculation. All right, but that's what every word in every debate is, right? So, nothing unique about this. It shows that Cruz is good at it.
I mean, when Cruz mentioned sugar subsidies, for example, that was a needle at Rubio because his big donor is the big sugar subsidy recipient. And that's one of the things that Rubio challenges, the sugar subsidies.
That's funny. See, Cruz is even better at this than I thought. That one sailed right over my head. I didn't even realize the connection. Kevin Gutzman during the debate pointed out that when Cruz mentioned the 5 departments he'd get rid of, apparently he mentioned commerce twice.
Yes.
I missed that.
It was sort of his Rick Perry moment.
That's what Kevin called it, yeah.
And I was wondering, what's the other department he wants to get rid of? I hope it's education, but we didn't get to find out.
Yeah, that's right. I have a few things that I've written down, but I will say quickly that in the Drudge poll, Rand did much better than he's been doing. I mean, he's been at the bottom, the total basement in these Drudge polls after the debate, but he was a strong third in this one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tend to think that the Drudge poll, there are about 250,000 people participating last time I looked, does give you a reflection of what the Republican primary voters, the Republican base think. So Trump is down, but he still is leading at 38%. Cruz number 2 at 23, then Rand at 15. I'm rounding all these off. Rubio at 13, and Carson at 5, Carly at 4, the unbelievably irritating Kasich at 2, and Jeb, the hilarious, awful Jeb at 1%.
Yeah, it's really, really terrible how Jeb is doing. So let's shift gears and talk about your overall impressions. Like, give me who stands out in terms of effectiveness and boobishness.
Well, I thought Rand stood out in terms of effectiveness. I thought Cruz did as well. I thought I must say I don't like the new Trump persona, which is, from what people tell me who know him, is the actual Trump. I mean, he's not the blustery, apprentice guy, and who of the first debate. And when people deal with him in business or in personal terms, he's just like the guy last night. So, but I guess he thinks this is being presidential or something. It'd be nice to have sort of something in between, not quite as blustery as the other guy, but maybe a little more zippy than last night. But he still won it. Cruz again did very, very well. Everybody touts Rubio. I mean, all the media, Rubio won. And of course, they love him because he's the neocon, and he's the neocon choice. Even though Cruz is a neocon too, but there's something about him that bugs the big-time neocons. So maybe he's not all bad, Cruz. But Rubio, they're all saying he won the debate. I don't buy it. And I was delighted to see Carson go way down. I must say, and I have to admit, I've never understood his appeal. So everything I may be saying is maybe balderdash, but it seemed to me he was even less impressive last night, less interesting, more, the Sphinx or something. Carly, who was competing with Kasich for the irritating prize, who kept, going way over time, just like Kasich. And Trump made a comment about it. He got booed because, of course, as we know, the rules are the sexes are entirely equal, must be treated entirely equally. However, a guy can't criticize a gal.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. He mentioned that he said because she was in the middle of interrupting Rand Paul, and Trump and Rand haven't exactly been best buddies, but Trump even interrupted to defend Rand. He said, she keeps interrupting everybody. It's terrible. I laughed at that. I didn't boo. I was laughing.
No, that was great. And of course, Kasich, angry the whole time. Yapping. He reminded me a little bit of Jindal. Is this horrible? I watched the undercard for the first time.
Oh, Lou, come on now, man.
I'll just mention that Jindal, I don't care what he's saying, what points he's making, he's like a little irritating, yapping dog. I mean, you just can't take him seriously. How he ever became governor of Louisiana, I don't know, but the idea that he's going to be president or anybody's going to like him on the national scene is just crazy. But I thought, I think Carly and Kasich did themselves harm. Carly, of course, a crazed warmonger. And by the way, it came out this morning, despite her claim that, well, I had a meeting with Putin, unlike you, Mr. Trump, who met him in the green room. The only time she met Putin was in a green room. So she was either had forgotten that or was lying or whatever. But she is a very, very unpleasant lady. She has a total makeover. May I make I guess this is sexist. She has a total makeover every time. That helmet of hair, is it a wig? Is it, do they put an entire carton of hairspray on it? I don't know, but it doesn't move. But no matter what they do to her, she's herself. And it's made much worse by the fact that she's Cruella de Vil. I mean, she's just longing for blood. And last night, and Trump was nice enough not to say anything, she kept saying, well, as a CEO, I did this and that. She, of course, ran every company she was in charge of into the ground. So maybe she is qualified to be president.
Yeah, indeed. I'm looking over things I jotted down, and one of them was about Kasich, whom you mentioned. I wrote that he confirms Joe Sobrin's definition of a moderate. Because you remember you're a liberal if you favor domestic intervention and a conservative if you favor foreign intervention, and you're a moderate if you favor both domestic and foreign intervention. And when I was listening to Kasich's laundry list of foreign interventions he wanted, I thought that just confirms it. And of course, if you favor neither kind of intervention, that makes you an extremist.
Also, I liked it when, of course, he's for subsidized mass migration. Oh, and he got tears in his eyes over the idea that might not continue. He's for subsidizing the big banks. I did love it when he was had his sort of humma moment, trying to explain why he didn't why we should bail out the banks when they get in trouble again. He got booed. So that was nice. And of course, Jeb was, of course, making that same point. Of course, you have to bail out the banks. Why? They're essential to everything. And of course, both these guys are in the pay of the banks personally as well as maybe politically, too. So I thought, and of course, Jeb was also getting tears in his eyes over the idea that subsidized mass migration might somehow be slightly cut off as versus being stepped up, and we should all love it. But whether it's in Western Europe or Eastern Europe, for that matter, or in this country, people don't like subsidized mass migration. The government planned, government subsidized, government directed gigantic demographic changes for reasons of roiling and wrecking the current culture so they can control us more easily, not because they have charity towards anybody. The government, I don't want to shock anyone listening to us, the government is not a charitable institution. It's a killer institution. It's a thieving institution. Their motives are never good.
Well, indeed, and that's why I think as soon as you realize that, it helps clarify your thoughts on pretty much everything. I'm curious to know, because as you mentioned, Kasich and Bush on this particular issue, and they're both in the basement, polling-wise, I have not been following Intrade this time around. Do you know what the betting people are saying about the nomination?
Isn't it tragic that the federal government put
did they shut that
Intrade out
down?
of business? Yes. So you have to go to the Irish betting parlors, and I must say I don't find them as interesting as or as accurate as Intrade. Intrade, I think, was shut down because they were so accurate. And of course, you have people like Sheldon Adelson and Steve Wynn and the other gambling moguls who want anything online, and they called this gambling. Anything online gambling shut down, destroyed, crushed, and so forth. So, but I think the government didn't like people being able to make accurate predictions, far more accurate than any poll, by the way, Intrade. So the government shut them down.
Yeah, I wanted to know that because it is so accurate, and I'm wondering if it's still somehow plausible to think that Bush will put things together because of his legacy name and make things work. Because I just can't see, even with all his money, I just can't see a path to that.
No, and of course he keeps defending his brother. Everybody hates his brother, and of course rightly so. Republicans hate his brother, and of course everybody else hates his brother. He was a total monster. I mean, a FDR kind of big spender domestically, of course a horrendous spender and murderer internationally. A real creep. I mean, a creep of the first water. Even worse than George H.W. Bush, although I know that's hard to imagine. And of course he's an open advocate of subsidized mass migration. Rubio has the brains, although he's of course Mr. Mass Migration. You look at the Schumer-Rubio bill and so forth. But he shuts up about it, or he avoids answering the question. Whether he continue to be able to do that, I don't know. But Bush is very open about it, and I think it dramatically hurts him. It's like these guys, Kasich and Bush especially, don't realize that Americans are sick of guys like Kasich and Bush.
Yeah.
Who are with the establishment. They're for all the horrible policies you can imagine. And they pretend also, of course, to be our betters. And also we should follow them just because they're our betters. And, no thanks.
Yeah, indeed. I want to go back to Rubio and foreign policy for a minute, but first let's thank our sponsor. Earlier this week, I caught up with Peter Schiff to ask him about some of the gold scams that gold buyers are likely to fall prey to if they're not careful. Here, I'm going to lob him a softball. Peter, what is the easiest way to avoid gold scams?
Well, to buy your gold from Schiff Gold. I mean, we're not the only legitimate company out there, but we're certainly one of them. But a lot of people, unfortunately, are buying their gold from the wrong firms, and so they end up buying the wrong gold, and they end up overpaying for it. In fact, gold prices have gone down over the last few years, but if you bought gold from some of our competitors that mark it up so much, I mean, your declines are enormous compared to the actual decline in the price of gold. I mean, there are people that are probably down 70, 80% or more on their gold investments, thanks mainly to the excessive markups that they paid. I mean, some of these firms mark their products up 30%, 40%, 50%, sometimes 100%. Whereas at a firm like Schiff Gold, you're looking at markups of more like 1% to 2%.
Thanks, Peter. Make sure and check out Peter's free report on avoiding gold scams through tomwoods.com/scams. And get free shipping when buying precious metals from Schiff Gold when you mention Tom Woods. Give them a call at 888-465-3160. Going back to Rubio and foreign policy, he, of course, gave the classic standard third-grade level neocon line last night, and one of the points he made was he still did this. They hate us because our girls go to school. And that reminds me, in 2004, bin Laden actually addressed this argument that they hate us for our freedom. Bin Laden actually said, "Oh yeah, then how come we're not attacking Sweden?" He actually said that. So, good question, right? No, it's not a question that anybody wants to ask. And then Fiorina took on Trump and Rand, saying, we have to speak from a position of strength. And a position of strength, of course, means being more belligerent than any U.S. president, maybe in history, based on what she wants to do. We're going to have exercises in the Baltic states, and we're going to have a missile system, so-called missile defense system in Poland.
Put more troops in Germany. By the way, what do the Germans think about that? She doesn't care, of course.
It makes no difference.
She's going to put them there.
Yeah. But that will make us strong. So blowing trillions of dollars and being involved in all these wars, they say we have to be in a position of strength, and we can't retreat because if we're in a position of strength and we're engaged with the world, our enemies will be less likely to attack. But actually, it's precisely when you're bogged down in really expensive, manpower-draining wars that your enemy would be more likely to attack. So it seems to me that a good response to her would be, yeah, I want to be in a position of strength too. I'd like all our troops back home so they can defend this country. I'd like to be in a position of strength where we're not blowing trillions of bucks on stupid wars that any moron knew were going to have the results that they've had. I'd like to be strong. That's the way I would respond to a Fiorina. How is it strong to be in 5 quagmires at once, basically? So that if there really were an actual crisis, what would we do?
She's got Paul Wolfowitz whispering in her ear, I guess. I mean, it's the craziest kind of neocon stuff. And my favorite was, we have to speak from a position of strength and not speak to Putin. Oh, I see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was
Rand was
another
great on
good
that.
point. Rand saying, look, even during the entire Cold War, nobody said we're not going to talk to the Russians. And then Fiorina tried to bring up Reagan walking out at Reykjavik. But then 1 year later, didn't he signed the, now I can't remember the name of it, but he signed a treaty with the Russians that actually did reduce the absolute number of some class of nuclear weapons.
Also, it was a hilarious moment at Reykjavik because when the neocons in his entourage were absolutely flipping out because he was in a meeting alone with Gorbachev and just a translator. And they were terrified they were going to reach an agreement. Yeah. So they were able to persuade him to call off the talks, very unfortunately. Because, of course, while they all are cheering Reagan and, Reagan foreign policy, hard, tough, manly, wonderful, Reagan actually did a lot of bad stuff, especially domestically. And foreign policy, he invaded Grenada. That was not a good thing, but on the other hand, it's not exactly the equivalent of invading Iraq. So,
right.
But of course, they never want to talk about that. Also, when he pulled the troops out of Lebanon, they never should have been in Lebanon. And maybe he even realized from some of his diary entries that when you go and kill people, when you bomb people, there's a reaction. People don't like to be bombed. They don't like to have their children mutilated. They don't like to have their families killed. I know, very strange. Maybe it's because they're Muslims. I don't know. They don't like to have the U.S. killing their families.
How about that? Now, I think I really am inclined to believe the various sources that tell us that Reagan, especially toward the end of his presidency, was thinking in terms of his legacy and history and wanted to be remembered as a peacemaker.
I think that's correct.
And no doubt that's why the neocons wouldn't want him alone with Gorbachev.
No, that's true. And they were always, you would never know it these days, they were always suspicious of him, even though he tragically, I guess, George H.W. Bush, James Baker, all the evil guys that he allowed himself to be surrounded with, brought in these neocons, but they never trusted him. So if the neocons don't entirely trust you, it means you're not all bad. I mean, the neocons, no matter what Rand did for them, they've never liked Rand, they've never trusted Rand. So why is he still catering to them sometimes? That's a mystery. They're never going to support you, Rand. Adelson is never going to write you the big check. So you might as well follow in your father's footsteps, your father's magnificent footsteps, and do what's best for this country. Keep doing what you started last night, and maybe you can pull this out. At the very least, you're going to have a good showing. You're going to have a historically significant showing. You're not just going to have to pull out with your tail between your legs.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this point look, I have no inside information, but he's got to be realizing that his only real successes come when he channels, as you say, he channels his father. Let's say a quick thing about Cruz and Rand on taxes. Now, I'll admit I haven't looked through. The idea of looking through people's tax plans is just not very appealing, but I wonder if this is a case of Geico versus Esurance, because you know that for years and years Geico would say, save 15% on car insurance in 15 minutes, but now in the age of the internet, 15 minutes seems like an eternity. But unfortunately, they're stuck with that slogan like an albatross around their necks. So Esurance is saying, what? I can get that in half the time. So they're exploiting that old slogan. Well, I'm wondering if Rand suffers in that way, if he's Geico, because his tax plan, the major plank is a 14.5% flat tax, but now Ted Cruz is Esurance and comes along and says, well, mine's a 10% flat tax. What do you do now? What does Rand do now?
Well, the worst thing about Rand's plan is also the worst thing about Cruz's plan. They're calling for a value-added tax.
Even Cruz?
Oh, yeah. Cruz has a VAT, so does Rand. That's how they can have the low figure on the front end. So this is extremely dangerous. Murray Rothbard wrote some great stuff about this. But once you have the value-added tax, which taxes absolutely everything at every stage of production, it takes just a minuscule increase in that tax to bring in vast revenues to the government. It's very dangerous. And of course the idea, these guys, and we're going to get rid of the IRS. You know what? It's going to be a collection force. Maybe they'll call it the Department of Protecting the Nation or whatever, or like one of the horrible secret police agencies in Germany, Office for the Protection of the Constitution. Oh yeah, right. So they'll call it something else. A value-added tax is horrendous, dangerous. It's even worse than Huckabee and his so-called fair tax. So both of these guys, by the way, pretend to have nearly a revenue-neutral plan. Well, what the heck is that? Revenue, the government is already bringing in more. We've already have the richest, most powerful, most rotten government ever in the history of the human race. And we think that, we've got to make sure they keep getting all the same amount of dough. Why not cut them? Yes, we should worry about the deficit, which, by the way, is not 19 trillion, as Kotlikoff at Boston University shows. It's more like 226 trillion, not 19 trillion, if you include all the liabilities of the U.S. government on pensions and federal pensions, veterans pensions, congressional pensions, and so forth. So this is one thing Trump's plan does. It's a huge cut in government income, and we're supposed to think, oh my gosh, well, you can't have that. And I noticed somebody last night kept saying, why, this present situation puts more demands on the government. Oh, poor government. None of these guys can even say the old Republican staple, the government has no money of its own. It only has what it takes from the people. They can't, of course, they can print it up, but that has deleterious effects too.
Right.
So you wish somebody would point that out, but a VAT tax is a very, very bad idea. Rand's plan was put together by Steve Forbes. Excuse me, not Steve Forbes. By Steve Moore. Excuse me.
Oh yeah.
And this is not a libertarian guy. This is again somebody focused on making sure the government's income isn't cut.
Yeah.
The government's income must be cut. So I must say I like the Trump plan the best.
Well, I know of the people on the stage, the ones that I know for a fact are expressly not revenue neutral, and they make that a selling point, are Cruz and Rand. And they even brought that up last night, that it's not revenue neutral. And it's interesting that when they raised this with Cruz and they said, well, how are you going to pay for it? He basically said, well, my plan is going to basically lose $768 billion, even according to the, official estimates. But, I still want to do it. Which was, interesting. Like, he didn't even say, well, where are you going to get the money? It was an interesting response that he even admitted, yeah, it is going to lose money. Whereas normally they say, oh, we'll have 4% growth, that'll cover all the shortfalls. And he didn't actually try to go down that route. I found that rather surprising. By the way, I just dug up the article. Well, on the internet, dug up is 3 seconds of typing. I found the value-added tax by Rothbard, the value-added tax article, and I'm going to link to that so people can check that out. Rothbard on value-added tax will be linked at tomwoods.com/531. And it's so interesting. He wrote this the year I was born. 1972, Rothbard has this article that has, dealt with the value-added tax, definitively. So we'll link to that. Any parting thoughts? Anything we neglected to mention, you think?
Well, I do have to say that the debate was less interesting than the previous debates without the moderators attacking the candidates. So I must say I sort of missed that.
I think they were cowed, right?
Yeah, they were cowed, and they were patting themselves on the back about just how great they were. And I did notice that Morton Kondracki, the horrible Morton Kondracki, was saying, "Oh, you're great. You had a debate the way it should be held." And he said, "I don't know about your ratings. The heck with your ratings. Nobody cares about your." Well, they do care about their ratings. They're in business.
Yeah, you don't say. Yeah.
So it's I don't know. It seems to me they're going to want. Who knows, right? So the candidates, of course, want no trouble from the moderators, like last night. The networks would like to give them trouble. We'll see in the future, but I think the fact that this is not going to have the interest or the ratings, my guess is there are a lot of people, I know a lot of people, who just tuned out partway through it because they didn't find it as, the last time they were, it was like a fist fight and they were cheering on one side. The Republican side, unfortunately, most of the time.
But there was one that time that Rubio and Rand were going back and forth and the foreign policy discussion. But I think that may have been later on. But that definitely, I thought that was at least as engaging as anything I thought the economic debate, the one before this one, was by far the most boring because they're all more or less agreeing with each other. We have to cut spending. We have to cut taxes. We probably don't have any intention of doing either one of these things. Everybody watching knows that, and yet we're still going through it.
Oh, no, the only interesting thing in the previous debate was the moderator saying, "Now, why are you a creep?" Or, similar question.
That's right. And of course, which is teeing up a softball for old Ted Cruz to smash out of the park. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap things up again. And at the end of these, Lou, I'm always asking you when the next one is. I just can't bring myself even to look. Do you know when the next one is? Is there one in December?
There isn't one December, I think about December 15th, but don't quote me on that date. But I'm sure we'll both be blogging this, and we'll talk about when the next debate is.
Yeah. Okay, so don't worry, everybody. This will happen. This, the Lou and Tom show for the debates is like the defining event of our generation. It's like the moon landing was for people in the late 60s, so it's not going away.
By the way, I'll never forget Richard Nixon, another terrible Republican president, who referred to the moon landing, at the time of the moon landing, as referred to the U.S. as being the last best hope of man. And nobody said, well, isn't that blasphemous? But of course, it's the president, right? He can be blasphemous. That's right.
That's right. Which, by the way, I'll just say in parentheses, is why it was such a bad idea for a certain candidate to publish a book about presidential prayers.
Oh.
No.
The idea that we're supposed to look up to these creeps as religious leaders.
Oh, horrible. So very bad
idea.
And
also very dangerous, of course. Very dangerous. This is what, when they talk about uniting of church and state, it's not that the Methodists are going to be getting money from the government, although that would be bad enough. It has to do with the state pretending to be the church, the state pretending to be God, because, of course, the state is always very jealous of God, would love to displace God in people's affections, works very hard to bring that about. And so the idea that you praise this bunch of killers and liars and monsters and creeps as religious leaders, I mean, come on.
Well, no doubt. So I just had to make a brief mention of that. All right, but that's it. Lou, thanks again. I always appreciate it, and everybody loves hearing from you, so thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, before I let you folks go, remember, I have now launched, in addition to this weekday show, Monday through Friday, I've now launched Contra Krugman with Bob Murphy. That's a weekly podcast in which we refute Paul Krugman's New York Times column and thereby teach economics week after week. We have a lot of fun there, so by all means check that out and subscribe at ContraKrugman.com. Tomorrow, if all goes well, Adam Kokesh will join me. He has not been a guest yet in 531 episodes. We're going to talk about what he's been up to. Friday, Matt Ridley comes back to the show. We're going to talk primarily about government and science and why we do not, in fact, need government funding of science. That's going to be one of the arguments you'll encounter quite a bit. Well, what would we do if the government weren't funding science? We'd all be primitive idiots worshiping Thor or whatever. All of that's going to be addressed by Matt Ridley, who's just tremendous on issues like this. So a lot of fun stuff coming up. Make sure you subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit TomWoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.